I was convinced I was going crazy. For months, the people I trusted most, my partner and my closest friend, told me I was too emotional, too unstable, that my memories couldn't be trusted. They even gave me a private journal, telling me to write down my erratic thoughts to track my own decline. It was the one tool they swore would save my sanity. But one night, I found a digital exchange on a forgotten laptop. What I saw wasn't just a betrayal. It was proof that every moment of my supposed mental breakdown was a performance, a carefully orchestrated script. And the journal wasn't a lifeline. It was ammunition. The chilling part? The messages I discovered weren't about breaking up with me. They were about erasing me entirely. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. I was a meticulous person, a graphic designer who lived by details and organization. I never lost things, never missed appointments. I trusted my memory completely. But over the past few months, things had been shifting. My reality felt off. It started small. I'd swear I put my keys on the counter, only to find them in my jacket pocket. I'd buy milk and then find an unopened carton already in the fridge. But then it got personal, centering on my relationship with my boyfriend, Rylan, and my best friend, Julia. "You never told me you were going to the concert with Brooke," Rylan would say, even though I distinctly remembered telling him weeks ago at dinner. "You seemed so upset last weekend," Julia would comment. But when I searched my memory, I remembered feeling perfectly fine, even happy. When I tried to defend myself, they'd both use the same calmly dismissive tone. "You must be mistaken, Anya. You're just remembering things differently." They made me feel like I was constantly overreacting, like my feelings were always too intense or inappropriate. My insecurities, especially about Rylan's attention, seemed to get triggered more and more often. It culminated 3 weeks ago at a backyard barbecue. Julia brought up Rylan's attractive new coworker, Serena, casually mentioning how much Rylan and Serena had been bonding over their shared project. I felt a familiar pang of jealousy and, unfortunately, reacted emotionally. I accused Rylan of prioritizing his work friends over me. Rylan didn't yell. Instead, he sighed sadly. "Anya, you're being self-obsessed again. Julia and I are worried about you." Julia immediately chimed in. "We just want you to be happy, but you've been so unstable lately." In front of our friends, they turned my moment of insecurity into a public intervention. I was mortified and spent the rest of the evening apologizing for my erratic behavior. Later that week, Rylan suggested I start journaling. He said it would help me process my emotions logically and stop misremembering things. "It's for your own good, babe. We just want to see you get back to your happy, stable self." I desperately wanted to believe him. I started logging everything: my moods, my feelings, and especially my interactions with Rylan and Julia. I wrote about feeling guilty over the barbecue incident, about trying to be less reactive. For a while, the logging seemed to help. When Rylan would try to gaslight me, I could check my phone. "I swear I told you about meeting Brooke on Friday," I'd assert. He'd shrug. "Maybe your journal will help you remember. Look it up." And often when I looked, the entry was ambiguous or missing entirely. My confusion grew. The psychological erosion was slow but relentless. I went from being certain of my memories to constantly doubting every thought. I started apologizing preemptively for things I hadn't even done yet, terrified of appearing unstable. I spent hours rereading my entries, searching for a pattern to the missing or confusing pieces of my memory. Rylan was supportive through it all, which was the most confusing part. He'd hug me when I cried. He'd reassure me I was just going through a difficult mental patch. He and Julia would discuss my progress with such sincere concern that I was grateful to have them in my life. Then, last night, Julia sent me a screenshot of a conversation she'd had with Rylan. Rylan had sent her a screenshot from my journal. It was a passage I'd supposedly written about being paranoid that Rylan was cheating with Serena. Julia had replied, "See, we need to keep documenting this. I think she's getting worse." My blood ran cold. I hadn't written that. I mean, I felt insecure, but I hadn't written it down. The moment the screenshot arrived, Rylan was in the bathroom. Curiosity, desperation, and paranoia merged. I grabbed his laptop. It was still logged into his messaging app. I was looking for the original conversation with Julia. I wanted to see the full context of the exchange. I needed to see if I was truly delusional or if there was something else happening. I found the chat thread. It was extensive, dating back months. I scrolled down, terrified of what I might find. Rylan's text messages with Julia weren't just about my mental health. They were detailed, cold-blooded planning. Their conversations meticulously documented my insecurities, my deepest fears, and how to weaponize them. She wrote about feeling anxious about her job today, Rylan messaged Julia. "Perfect. We'll use that to justify the unstable narrative." Julia responded, "Bring up her ex-partner again. That always pushes her to write something dramatic about her low self-worth. We need more content." I saw messages where they had specifically designed the scenario at the barbecue with Brooke and Serena as the audience. Julia had asked Rylan to bait me by mentioning Serena so that my emotional reaction would appear unprovoked and irrational to our friends. "Make sure you seem heartbroken when she yells, Julia advised Rylan. "It makes her look like the villain." The chilling part was that I remembered that moment perfectly. Rylan's look of calm, sad disappointment that had crushed me into apologizing. It was all a performance. I continued scrolling, discovering that every seemingly caring conversation they'd had with me was immediately followed by a debrief session between them. "She's starting to calm down," Rylan messaged Julia, after a night that he'd spent comforting me. "Give it 2 days, then hit her with the next round of doubt." They refer to my emotional state, my vulnerability, and my journal entries as content for their plot. But the most shocking evidence was the existence of screen captures of my supposed journal entries that I was certain I had never written. These screen captures, which Rylan was sharing with Julia, painted a picture of a severely paranoid and possessive person, a person I knew I was not. They showed me writing about stalking Rylan's social media, obsessing over Serena, and planning confrontations. When I checked the dates on these shared screen captures, I cross-referenced them with my actual journal entries on my phone. They didn't match, not even close. The themes, the words, the handwriting font, everything was subtly but fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just that they were telling me I was crazy, they were fabricating digital evidence to prove it to each other and anyone else they needed to convince. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the laptop steady. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just gaslighting me for fun. They were executing a systematic campaign to destroy my credibility. I saw a message from Rylan explaining how he'd be using a remote desktop application to access my logging app when I was asleep or in the shower. He would then create a fake, hyper-dramatic entry, take a screenshot, and immediately delete the forged text from my phone before I ever saw it. He was manufacturing a digital paper trail of my mental decline to be used against me later. "It's brilliant," Julia had replied. "By the time she tries to defend herself, she'll have no proof and we'll have a mountain of evidence that she's unstable." I scrolled past dozens of such messages, each one a hammer blow to my shattered trust. They were documenting my life for the purpose of my destruction. Over the next few weeks, the manipulation intensified. Rylan became subtly more distant, and Julia became excessively concerned. They worked in tandem. Rylan would express quiet worry about my mood swings, and Julia would show up with a self-help book, acting as the troubled friend. I started taking my phone everywhere, obsessively checking my true log entries against the dates on Rylan's screenshots to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The energy drain was immense. I was spending all my time fighting a battle that I didn't even realize was coordinated. I became jumpy, anxious, and prone to tears, fitting the exact profile of the unstable person they were creating. This in turn fueled their fabricated evidence. Rylan would screenshot my real-life emotional reactions and send them to Julia for commentary. She just cried because I suggested we order in instead of going out, Rylan wrote. Julia replied, unstable. Make sure you document it in the log tonight. He was logging my genuine distress caused by their own actions and mixing it with the fabricated entries to create a seamless, damning narrative. I started feeling isolated. I withdrew from Brooke and Serena, afraid they would see how erratic I had become. Rylan and Julia subtly encouraged this isolation, praising me for taking time for myself to focus on my mental health journey. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Rylan's phone when he received a text. The sender was Serena. It wasn't flirty, just work-related, but the sight of her name caused a spike of anxiety. I immediately felt the programmed rush of guilt for being possessive. I later checked his tablet again, hoping I hadn't succumbed to the paranoia they were trying to instill. I found a fresh conversation with Julia. Ryland had just sent her a screenshot of a fake log entry from that very afternoon about my irrational jealousy over Serena. He hadn't just hoped for the emotional content, he had already prepared the fake record of it before the conversation with Serena even happened. This was the moment the scale tipped. The shock wasn't about the content, it was about the speed and efficiency of the deception. I stopped crying, I stopped shaking. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, fueled by pure, absolute rage. I closed Ryland's messaging app and began to scroll back, this time not looking for guilt or clarification, but looking for irrefutable evidence. I searched for the oldest messages, the ones showing the genesis of the plan dating back before I started the journal. Ryland was still in the living room, quietly watching a documentary, utterly unaware that his meticulously constructed reality was unraveling in my hands. The silence in the apartment felt deafening, a thin veneer stretched over the massive, hidden structure of their deceit. I continued my scroll, finding early communications where they discussed my vulnerabilities like a strategic briefing. She has a real thing about her self-worth. We can use that to make her question every decision she makes. Perfect, Rylan replied. The more anxious she is, the more believable our concern will be when we talk to Brooke. They even had code words. The project was the plan to destabilize me, and content was anything they could use from my emotional state or their fabricated log entries. I was no longer seeing my partner and my friend. I was seeing two master manipulators executing a long-term psychological attack. My focus narrowed to the specific mechanics of the deception, the forged timestamps, the altered phrasing, the creation of a shadow narrative. I found a long thread where Rylan meticulously explained to Julia how to use image editing software to swap names and dates on screenshots. They practiced making me look jealous of Serena in several fake entries, honing the skill until the forgeries were nearly undetectable. He was essentially giving Julia a step-by-step tutorial on how to commit digital character assassination. I took a moment to breathe, the air thick with the realization that my sense of being confused was actually my psyche battling with outright propaganda. They hadn't just made me doubt my memory, they had built a parallel version of my life where I was the villain, the unstable one, and they were the noble, suffering caretakers. I realized I needed to secure the evidence before either of them had a chance to realize what was happening. I quickly switched to my own phone and began taking screenshots of their entire chat history, including the time markers, the editing tutorials, and the full extent of the Phase 2 plan. This was no longer about proving my sanity, it was about building an irrefutable case against them. Every cruel joke, every manipulative instruction was documented. I paused for a moment to transfer the initial batch of screenshots to a password-protected cloud storage, ensuring that if Rylan realized what I was doing and took the device, the evidence would be safe. I glanced at Rylan, who was now dozing on the sofa, a look of serene innocence on his face. The contrast between his peaceful demeanor and the monstrous plot detailed on the screen was sickening. I returned to the messages, focusing on the specific content they were creating about my jealousy towards Serena and my general self-obsessed. I realized that the sheer volume of fabricated evidence was their real weapon. It was designed to overwhelm anyone who dared to question them. The deeper I dug, the more connections I made. Every moment of my anxiety over the past 6 months was the direct result of their targeted emotional abuse. I found a thread where Julia and Rylan celebrated a public display of my emotional distress, viewing it as a major victory for the project. My quiet fury hardened into resolve. I was no longer the confused, self-doubting Anya. I was now the investigator, gathering the evidence needed from my defense. The process was slow and painstaking. I had to scroll carefully, making sure I captured every single exchange, every date, and every deleted log entry screenshot. I came across a thread discussing my family. Julia had asked Rylan if they should reach out to my sister yet. And Rylan replied, "Not yet. We need a bigger emotional reaction first. Wait until she's hysterical, then we intervene." They were strategically timing my breakdown to maximize its effect on my support system. Their malice was methodical, not impulsive. I found a thread where they had ranked my friends, determining who would be the easiest to convince, labeling Brooke as highly empathetic and Serena as easily swayed by logic. The casual cruelty of their communication was staggering. They had dissected my social circle, turning every relationship into a tactical asset. I meticulously captured the conversations detailing the financial aspects, how Rylan planned to keep the apartment and how Julia would help him move my belongings once I was out of the picture. I was capturing not just a betrayal of love, but the planning of an entire hostile takeover of my life and assets. I found a long, sickening thread where they used my real, genuine log entries about feeling overwhelmed by work as the template for their fake ones. By slightly exaggerating my actual words and inserting mentions of Serena and paranoia, they created documents that were horrifyingly plausible. I transferred another large batch of screenshots to my cloud storage, realizing the data was now safe, secured across 3 different devices in 2 locations. I was armed. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear determination. They had relied on my self-doubt. Now my certainty was my armor. I continued capturing the full, unedited chat logs, methodically securing the proof of every lie. I made sure to include the time-stamped receipts of their messages, which could not be easily manipulated. The silence in the apartment was now a tense vacuum. I could hear Rylan stirring in the living room, about to wake. I knew my time was almost up. I focused on getting the very earliest messages, the ones that laid out the rules of the project, detailing exactly when and why they decided to target me. I came across a message from Julia that simply read, "Remember, the goal is total dependence. Once she needs us to tell her what's real, we win." That line, "we win," crystallized the sheer competitive malice behind their actions. This wasn't concern, it was a gain to them, with my mind as the trophy. I continued to scroll backward, looking for any other contingency plan they might have discussed, but the volume of the daily logs was overwhelming. Rylan shifted on the sofa and sighed softly in his sleep. I took a steadying breath, knowing I had enough evidence to expose them all. I swiftly scrolled back up the chat thread, doing one final rapid review of the fake log entries that Rylan had shared with Julia. I wanted to ensure every date and timestamp was captured. I was looking for the most egregious examples of fabrication, the entries that directly mentioned Serena and my fictional jealousy. I focused specifically on the dates where I knew I had been preoccupied with my work stress, as those were the entries they seemed to have targeted the most for alteration. It became clear that the purpose of the Serena content was twofold: to provide proof of my possessiveness and to ensure that Rylan had a convenient, non-threatening romantic interest ready once I was discredited. I scrolled back to the thread detailing the cookout confrontation, specifically the messages where Julia confirmed that Brooke and Serena had witnessed my alleged breakdown. But as I scrolled through, I began to notice discrepancies that didn't align. Time markers were incorrect. Screen captures looked slightly manipulated. Messages between Rylan and Julia mentioned log entries I was certain I had never written. I opened my logging application on my personal phone and cross-referenced the materials. There was a screen capture from my log detailing feelings of possessiveness over Rylan's colleague, Serena. But when I checked my actual entries, I had never written about Serena at all. I had documented my feelings of low self-worth after viewing his ex-partner's photos on a social media platform, but the captured image displayed entirely different text. Someone had deliberately edited it, changing the names, altering the entire context, making me, Anya, sound more apprehensive and controlling than I had genuinely been. I continued comparing more screen captures that fundamentally did not match my genuine entries. Words I had never committed to paper, attributed to me in their digital exchanges. Entire paragraphs that sounded like my personal voice, but expressed feelings I had never truly held. My hands trembled violently as I scrolled further back, searching for the inception of this pattern. When had the fabricated screen captures begun? How long had this elaborate deception been in motion? Then I discovered an exchange that instantly stole my breath away. A message from Rylan to Julia, dated 3 weeks before I had even begun the logging habit. I believe I can persuade her to start documenting her thoughts. Then we'll possess all the necessary material. Her reply, excellent. Once she's recording all her tumultuous thoughts, it will be significantly easier to establish her instability. I reread the exchange 3 times before the magnitude of the betrayal sunk in. They had premeditated this entire scenario. The logging had not been Ryland's genuine recommendation for my mental welfare. It had been a calculated trap from the very beginning. But it was worse still. I found messages where they discussed what to encourage me to write about. Ryland would introduce subjects designed to exploit my deep-seated insecurities, then patiently wait for me to process them in my log. If I failed to record the content they desired, they would simply invent fabricated entries and share them as genuine captures from my device. I'm going to mention how striking that woman at the local cafe is, read one message from Rylan. That should provoke her to write about her self-perception issues again. Good, Julia had replied. I'll bring up Serena tomorrow and see if she exhibits jealousy. We require more content about her being controlling. Content. They were treating my deepest emotions as mere entertainment. My vulnerabilities were nothing more than a script they could write and direct. I found the full conversation where they had meticulously planned the cookout confrontation. Julia had inquired of Rylan what topics would make me appear most unbalanced in front of our acquaintances. He has suggested she publicly accuse me of being self-absorbed because it would appear to stem from authentic worry from a concerned friend. Make sure you execute it when Brooke and Serena are present, he had written. They will serve as good witnesses if we need character verification later. Character witnesses for what? I kept scrolling, my stomach heaving with each devastating new revelation. They had contingency plans, escape routes, alternative strategies for every conceivable outcome. If I ever attempted to defend my actions, they had fake log entries prepared to prove I was delusional. If I tried to show people the real entries, they could claim I had edited them retroactively. But the most terrifying discovery emerged in a communication from just last week. She's growing suspect, Rylan had written. I think she's starting to realize that we discuss her. Time to proceed to phase 2 then, Julia had replied. What is phase 2? Arrange for her institutionalization. If she is officially declared mentally unsound, no one will credit anything she says about us. Furthermore, you'll be free to court whomever you choose while she's receiving assistance. The detailed plan was chillingly clear. They intended to escalate their psychological manipulation until I experienced a breakdown. They would document my erratic behavior with additional fake log entries and supporting accounts from acquaintances who had witnessed my concerning actions at social events. Then they would present this evidence to my family, perhaps even to mental health specialists, as conclusive proof that I required immediate institutional care. And then Rylan would be entirely free to pursue whomever he wished, with Julia's complete endorsement and blessing. I found messages where they discussed his dating prospects. Several names were mentioned, but one reappeared with alarming frequency. Julia, I know we agreed to wait until she's no longer a factor, but I'm finding it increasingly difficult to pretend I don't harbor deep feelings for you. I know, I feel exactly the same way, but we must adhere to the plan. Once she is successfully removed, we can be openly together without any associated commotion. They weren't just destroying me for their entertainment, they were systematically dismantling my life to pave the way for their own coupling. I captured screen images of everything. Every fabricated log entry, every planning discussion, every cruel remark about my emotional state. The body of evidence was colossal and undeniable. But as I organized it all, I recognized the insidious nature of their trap. They had isolated me from our mutual acquaintances, forced me to doubt my own reality, and positioned themselves as the deeply concerned parties attempting to help a clearly unstable person. Who would possibly believe me? I had spent months being told I was too emotionally reactive, too self-focused, too anxious. They had systematically conditioned everyone in our social circle to view me as the root of the problem. I looked at the time markers on their messages. Some were sent while I was in the same room as Rylan, trusting him, loving him, completely unaware that he was directing my psychological undoing in real time, just feet away. There was the message sent while I was preparing our evening meal, where he informed Julia about a baseless log entry I'd supposedly written about his female colleagues. I'd been humming a tune in the kitchen, feeling happy and at peace, while he fabricated evidence of my mental instability. There was another message transmitted during the film we'd watched the previous weekend, where he'd shared a fake screen capture about me being jealous of Julia. I'd been nestled beside him, feeling thankful for his supposed support during a difficult time, while he painted me as obsessive and controlling to my closest friend. The betrayal was so thorough, so precisely calculated, that it literally stole my breath. Every supportive word, every thoughtful action, every moment of intimacy had been a calculated performance. He had never truly cared for me. I had been a mere objective, a project, an obstruction to be eliminated. And Julia, who I had entrusted with my entire life, whom I considered closer than any relative, had been an active conspirator from the very genesis of the plan. The most awful realization was how successfully their plan had unfolded. I had begun to question my own judgment, to doubt every single emotion, wondering if I truly was as emotionally unstable as they claimed. They had almost entirely succeeded in convincing me that I was the problem. But now I held the proof. Pages and pages of evidence illustrating exactly how they had manipulated my reality, fabricated my supposed mental illness. They had plotted my expulsion from their lives. I transferred everything to a protected folder on my personal devices. Screen captures, message histories, time markers, the complete digital record of their systematic deception. Then I sat back and began to formulate how to use it. I heard Rylan's key turning in the lock. He was back from collecting lunch, likely expecting to find me in my customary state of confused self-doubt. "Hello, darling," Rylan called out as he entered through the main door, takeout containers in his hands. "I picked up those wraps you enjoy." I was still seated at the rustic kitchen counter, his tablet wide open in front of me. Screen captures of his extensive betrayal illuminated the display. "Take a seat," I instructed him, without raising my gaze. "Take a seat," I repeated, rotating the tablet toward him so he could see precisely what I had uncovered. His face cycled through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, immediate recognition, stark panic, followed by a terrifying, calculated composure. "I can clarify," he said, placing the food down and slowly pulling the chair opposite me. "Truly, You can clarify this. I scrolled to the conversation where they had planned my institutionalization. I opened my actual logging application and placed my phone next to his tablet. Really? Because here is what I actually wrote on April 15th. And here is the screen capture you sent Julia from that exact same date. Note how they are entirely different. Before he could formulate a response, I took my phone and called Julia. Too late, I informed him. I already have screen captures of absolutely everything. 20 minutes later, Julia knocked at the door. I allowed her entry, noting how her eyes immediately darted to Ryland with a look of feigned concern. I opened Ryland's tablet and turned it toward her. I found your messages. Fine, okay, she conceded, her voice undergoing a complete transformation. Yes, we developed feelings for each other, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that we were correct about your emotional state. I showed her entry after entry, comparing the real versions with the screen captures they had shared. Different words, different worries, entirely different levels of stability. You planned to use that fake evidence to have me institutionalized. Get out, I said quietly but firmly. Get out of my apartment, both of you, right now. I sat alone in my apartment in Willow Creek, California, with the irrefutable evidence of their betrayal spread across multiple illuminated screens. I forwarded the evidence to Serena and Brooke first, the acquaintances who had personally witnessed Julia's public accusations against my behavior. Their replies arrived within a few hours. Shock, heartfelt apologies, and furious anger at being tricked into doubting me. I permanently blocked them both on every platform. I started attending professional therapy to work through the profound psychological damage they had inflicted. My real log became a powerful tool for healing instead of ammunition for my destruction. 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Rylan and Julia had attempted to date, but had broken up within a few weeks. I had successfully learned to trust myself again, to immediately recognize the difference between healthy self-examination and insidious psychological manipulation. The story of Anya, the graphic designer from Willow Creek, California, concludes with her reclaiming her reality and her life. So that's my story. It took losing everything, my sense of reality, my trust, and almost my freedom to finally uncover the truth. I learned that gaslighting isn't just about arguments. It's about two people systematically working together to make you believe your own mind is broken. But I found my way out, and I got my life back. I hope this story helps someone else who might be doubting themselves. If you have ever been in a relationship that made you question your sanity, please drop a comment below and share your experience. Did you recognize any of the tactics? How did you finally regain control of your own narrative? If you want to support more stories about finding the strength to walk away from toxic situations, please like this video and subscribe for more content. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss what we uncover next. Thank you for watching, and remember to always trust your gut.